And with us for the next 30 minutes, I've been joined by the Conservative MEP Timothy Kirkhope and the UKIP MEP Tim Aker. Welcome to both of you. Let's talk first about one of those stories mentioned there, and that's campaigning beginning to heat up ahead of Britain's referendum on EU membership. How's it looking to you now? The Prime Minister's in no hurry. Manuel Valls says there's still a lot of work to do.
I think there is quite a lot of work to do, but I think the Prime Minister's made a lot of progress.
Do you? In which
well, I'm
regard?
talking to people in Europe every day, and certainly the feedback I'm getting is very positive.
On which areas?
Oh, I think particularly in relation to the questions of freedom of movement. That is a tricky one, we know that, and that has to be sorted out, and I think he is making progress in his discussions. Equally well, I think, on the question of the terms like ever closer union, I think that is making progress and getting the right kind of terms and the right kind of agreements.
Which way will you vote?
I will see what the Prime Minister comes back with. If he can actually give us a positive outcome, and I'm pretty confident, more confident than I was that he will, then I will of course support him, and I will support remaining in the European Union. As
it stands now, though, you'd vote out?
I would not vote out at the moment. I would wait to see what the terms are. But I'm actually very positive in my view. I think that this is the important point. It's not just what Britain can get out of this deal. It is what happens from then on. If the other countries in Europe are going to take part in the process that the Prime Minister's negotiating, that's got to be good news for Europe as well as good news for ourselves.
Right. Well, I mean, if people like Timothy Kirkhope are being persuaded by this whole renegotiation process, you're not going to see many Conservatives like him voting for Brexit.
Well, we've got, sitting on the fence, Tim, is bad for your health. I remember asking you last year that why David Cameron isn't actually renegotiating fundamental free movement. You said it was silly. So we're hearing lots of these Conservatives now saying one thing at home and going into the European Parliament and saying a completely different thing altogether. He's not calling for free movement to be reformed and to end free movement and all rights of people who have been attracted by this migrant crisis that will get EU passports and come to the UK. He's not said anything about this, the 20 billion pounds we give to the EU every year, about stopping that. There is no change. It's just shadowboxing.
Do we think it's going to be in June? Both of you?
Sooner the better.
Sooner the better, I agree. But,
right.
Tim is wrong about some of the things he says. Passports, EU passports, Tim, do you know how long it takes to get a passport in Germany? 8 years? 10 years in Italy? How long does it take to get a passport here? 5 years. You really just don't know your facts. You just
that hasn't stopped the mass immigration, which again,
you come here, a lot of scaremongering.
We're going to talk about immigration in just a moment. So you can hold your fire. Now, the EU is in the grip of a migrant crisis, and it's not about to go away. This week, the International Monetary Fund predicted that 1.3 million migrants could arrive in Europe every year. French Prime Minister Manuel Valls has warned that Europe's migration crisis poses a direct threat to the future of the EU. And there's evidence that Schengen, that's the EU's passport-free travel zone, of which the UK isn't a member, is already unravelling, as member states reintroduce border controls to try to stem the flow of people fleeing conflict zones in the Middle East and elsewhere. In August last year, Hungary built a fence along the border with non-Schengen country Serbia, blocking a railway line used as a key crossing point. In September, Austrian authorities imposed border controls at the main crossings from Hungary. Later that month, the German government imposed border checks with Austria. The next day, Slovakia placed 220 police officers along its borders with Hungary and Austria. And the Netherlands temporarily reinstated border controls with Germany. In October, Hungary built a razor-wire fence along the border with Slovenia. And at the beginning of the year, Sweden introduced checks on the Öresund Bridge, which links the country with Denmark, while Denmark imposed border controls with Germany. Well, we're joined now by the Labour MEP Claude Moraes. He's chair of the European Parliament's Justice and Home Affairs Committee. And, of course, my other guests are still here. Claude Moraes, Schengen's dead, isn't it?
It's in deep trouble. And Manuel Valls was absolutely right to say that this is an existential crisis and it's a deep crisis. The problem with what he's saying, though, is he's a Prime Minister from a big country, and it's only the big countries that have the assets to do something about it. When he says it's the EU has limited assets to do anything, institutions that is, Frontex, the Asylum Support Office. I mean, these are minimal assets. Frontex is not some sort of big military agency. It's a bunch of civilians doing a job on minimal budgets. It's the big countries that can do something. Now, whatever your view on the migration crisis, whether you think Germany was a pull factor, whether you're generous about the migration crisis, in the end, to deal with this, to have a tough external border, for example, the border agency, to have relocation, whatever your view, it is the countries like France, the big countries, who will have to do something now to create integrity on our external border and to create an organised and compassionate response.
Yes.
There's no other way out of this. I mean, even if Germany had not done what it had done, we would have had a global crisis.
Would it, though, have been on this sort of scale? I suppose we'll never know, will we?
Let me tell you one reason why. 85% of refugees now in Turkey are living outside camps. Even if Turkey was helping us now, they would not be able to control the situation fully.
Would then, Timothy, quotas have been a more efficient way of working through this migration crisis? Let's, for argument's sake, say we would still have had large numbers of people coming from the Middle East and parts of North Africa. Quotas would have meant there would have been a regulated system, that each country in the EU would have taken a proportionate number of migrants, and then both the Dublin Agreement, which is where asylum seekers or refugees have to actually claim asylum in the country they arrive at, and Schengen would have continued to function. No,
the key point, of course, is the renegotiation of Dublin, of the agreement, but maintaining the basic principles that we seem to have lost. I mean, I don't know whether Claude agrees with Yvette Cooper's remarks that Schengen should be dismantled. I don't know, but all I'm saying is I don't think so. I think the key thing is to get the nuts and bolts right. The nuts and bolts and the principles applying to people who arrive at the external borders of the European Union. We're not part of Schengen, of course, but the external borders are important to us. They have to be processed.
Can Greece and Italy cope with those numbers as the smaller country?
No, they will need more resources, and that is part of what we would propose. They need their help. But once they have that help, there should be no question about maintaining that principle that the first safe country that people arrive at has to be the country that processes applications. Right. Otherwise, it becomes chaotic, and that is what has been going on, I'm afraid, with a lack of resolve by some countries.
Do you agree with that principle, that actually the Dublin Convention agreement should stay put and should be reinforced?
Oh, you should claim asylum in the first safe place you get to. If your house is on fire, you don't go looking down the street, you go to the first house to call for the emergency services.
But is that really practical when you look at Greece and people arriving in the numbers they have been on the coast?
But the countries that are getting this influx is because the German Chancellor said, come on, come on. If one country's got responsibility for this, that these countries should be getting a cheque from, Germany should pay up.
She was. I mean, do you agree with Yvette Cooper that actually Schengen should be dismantled?
I mean, that's her view. If you dismantle it, you need to have something in its place. And actually, there's broad agreement here about Dublin, because the Commission are now consulting about, say, scrapping Dublin and replacing this Dublin 4. I mean, there's broad agreement here because it's natural to claim in the first country that you arrive in. If you take that away, you need to replace it with something pretty sensible. At the moment, Commission are not coming up with that. On Schengen, what Yvette Cooper is saying, of course, it's now de facto dying, but these freedoms are at the heart of Europe. They matter, and there's no point in her saying it's dead without saying what.
Well, that brings it on. Without Schengen, is that the end of the beginning of the end of the EU, which is what Manuel Valls said?
No. I mean, I disagree entirely about
that. That's what Tim wants. I don't want that, because I think Schengen is valuable economically.
But hang on. The point about Schengen is it's always had within it the ability to reintroduce borders when there's been a pressure or emergency situation. And that's what some of these countries, not all, but some are doing. The key point, again, we come back to it, the nuts and bolts of Dublin. We're all feeding in our ideas for the new Dublin Agreement. That isn't coming until March, so I'm a bit surprised that so much speculation in the media and elsewhere about someone saying what Dublin is going to be. It isn't decided at all yet, and I'm convinced that that basic principle of people being dealt with at the first safe country will be maintained.
Right.
And that's the key to it all.
But Tim, even if Germany and Angela Merkel hadn't said, refugees, you are all welcome here, would we be in a totally different situation to the one we are in currently?
Well, there's been movements across different European states for border controls to be reinstated, but there is a borders crisis in the European Union. There's a crisis over free movement, and I'm still waiting to hear why David Cameron will not negotiate free movement. Why is he tinkering with benefits? You know, you called renegotiating free movement stupid.
It's a
I want to know what
cornerstone
David Cameron actually thinks and why he's not taking this opportunity to reinsert British borders.
Is a basic principle which assists us normally, in normal circumstances, through our trade and our exchange of services and skills. It is absolutely vital for British interests that we do have freedom of movement.
Should it be suspended at the moment while this migration crisis is going on? Because there'll be many people, Timothy, that will say, once these migrants are within Schengen, and I don't know how many years it takes for migrants or refugees to gain some sort of citizenship, then they are free to move anywhere else.
Joe, refugees do not have freedom of movement. Please remember that. So all these refugees that UKIP are frightening us about, the scaremongering nonsense from UKIP...
Oh, you're calling Cologne scaremongering? You're calling Cologne scaremongering?
Hang on, that's not the same thing.
And your party, that's what I'm actually saying. They cannot have free movement now, the refugees, so that is not an issue, I think.
Do you think Manuel Valls has actually inflamed this situation with what he said, Claude Moraes, because inaccuracies about the status of refugees and migrants and who can actually then move, not only within Schengen but beyond, then starts to get into the media narrative?
He's in my party, and I'll say that, yes, he has. Why? Because there's no point in stating a problem and not saying what the solution is. On Monday, we have an Amsterdam GHA Council, and he should be sending ministers there to deal with the solution. Because, I mean, this was an example. Refugees at the moment have a certain status. They don't have immediate free movement. What the member states with the assets and the resources need to do with the problem that we currently have is get to work and sort out what we do about the relocation, the external border, because that's not going to go away. And the other issues, Dublin, Schengen, get some settlement on this, irrespective now of what we think about what Germany did or did not do, because we have a problem right now. So the big countries need to stop saying what the existential problem is. It's bleedingly obvious what it is, and start coming up with solutions.
We have to halt it there just for a moment. Now, you're going to stay with us, Claude Moraes. Relations between the EU and Poland, the sixth largest economy in the Union, have soured over controversial media and judicial reforms introduced by the new government in Warsaw. The Eurosceptic Law and Justice Party swept to power in elections last year. And this week, the Polish Prime Minister was called to Strasbourg to explain herself to MEPs at their monthly plenary meeting. Adam Fleming was there too.
What could possibly make you think Poland's new Prime Minister doesn't like the freedom of the media?
Prime Minister, would you like the EU? Would you like the EU to butt out, Prime Minister?
In Poland, there have been protests because the government's sacked loads of staff from the state broadcaster, and it's appointed a load of sympathetic new judges to the Constitutional Court. The European Commission's now investigating, using new powers to check that member states are upholding the rule of law.
Let me show you just how heated this whole issue has become. Look at the front cover of this Polish news magazine, which shows various senior figures from the EU, like the President of the Parliament, Martin Schulz, and Chancellor Merkel, dressed as Nazis.
In the Strasbourg chamber, Beata Szydło used history to make the case for her reforms.
To jest historia.
Poland's history has been a troubled history. Our fathers and grandfathers gave their blood for freedom, for us to be part of a united Europe. But they also spilt blood for the freedom of other European nations. For many decades we had to fight for the right to speak our own opinions, to fight for the right to build our own state. We achieved that, and we are not going to have that taken away.
Her main tormentor was the leader of the Liberal group, Guy Verhofstadt, who raised the spectre of Vladimir Putin.
The inconvenient truth here is that Mr. Putin doesn't like European unity. He wants, in fact, he has an obsession. He wants to destroy European unity, and what's happening in Poland, that could help him, Madam Prime Minister.
While the man from the Commission tried to sound calm. Tried to.
All members of the European Union have signed, of their own free will, and ratified by the national parliaments European treaties, thus entering into obligations as far as maintaining the rule of law is concerned.
But what about Law and Justice's parliamentary allies, the British Conservatives?
It's quite strange that they choose this particular issue. For example, when countries broke the Stability and Growth Pact, they didn't use this procedure. When countries like Greece do not play their role in defending the external borders of the Schengen, under the agreements they signed. They don't come in, but suddenly you have a more Eurosceptic government and they decide to use this procedure.
For supporters of the Polish government outside, some who travelled by bus for 16 hours for this, it's a question of where power lies, with the EU institutions or with the individual member states.
Prime Minister, how did it go? Do you think you convinced them?
If the Commission rules the Polish Prime Minister is acting undemocratically, she faces the prospect of losing her right to vote at future summits. Oh, and she still wouldn't answer my questions, even the nice ones.
Prime Minister, did you have a good trip to Strasbourg?
Well, well done for trying, Adam. Keep going there in Strasbourg. Tim, doesn't the EU have a right to investigate and look at what's going on in Poland?
Oh, it does. It can have its say like any democratic chamber, but I think there's something untoward about dragging a elected Prime Minister to the European Parliament to put them on the naughty step and say, now you, don't do this. The European Union's had its problems with democracy. Look at the time they've asked countries to vote again. So maybe it should get its own house in order before lecturing other member states.
Well, except all EU member states have signed up to the idea that the Commission can investigate whether countries are upholding the rule of law. And it seems there are claims that the Law and Justice Party in Poland are threatening that rule of law and democracy. So doesn't the EU have a right to do what it's doing?
I mean, the Commission has, of course, a right always to investigate any allegations about the treaties.
So you support it?
I have to say, no, what I say is this. Poland is one of the most lively democracies now. Since it threw off its sort of autocracy of the Soviet Union and become independent, it has actually developed its politics in a very lively way. And the last party in power certainly didn't like the new party getting an absolute majority, the PIS. And ever since then, they've been trying to sort of cause problems. I don't know what the answer to this is. All I do know is the Polish government seem to have, in my view, very good reasons for what they have been doing. And I frankly think the Commission should investigate, but certainly the European Parliament, which is taking upon itself all these sort of, you know, clever investigations based on a political approach. I think that is not the right forum for this at all.
I mean, the reports are that the Law and Justice Party in Poland has replaced constitutional court judges and public media executives in a professed drive to restore Poland to traditional values. Is that a worry?
Well, it's up for the Polish people to decide. It's not for anyone else that doesn't have a mandate to interfere. If the Polish people don't like it, they'll vote them out of the next election.
The previous government was the government that actually stuffed the court with its own appointees.
Well, and that is the point, of course, that the Polish Prime Minister is making, that actually they are just trying to redress the balance because the media and the courts were packed with people from the previous government. Yeah. Nothing wrong with that, is there?
And the problem here is that, I mean, I watched the debate and many of my colleagues who feel that, yes, the Commission has a role in this, as it did with Hungary, in redressing what are alleged breaches, and the Commission has a role. I mean, even Tim acknowledged, you know, we can do it, and it's there. It does backfire when you have this kind of enormous theatre where she got the last word, by the way.
Yeah.
You saw Timmermans. She put her hand up and said, please, Mr. President, can I have the last word for the sake of Poland, my nation? Timmermans made a great play for, you know, the treaties and rule of law, and these breaches are of concern to widespread alleged breaches, and they will be investigated by the Commission. The Commission ended up looking like the bad guys. She ended up looking like the heroine. And that's how it looked. And
so does it make you feel queasy, though, watching
what it makes
that?
me feel like is this is probably not the way to do it, to have this kind of court of public opinion where you target an individual country. It's probably not the way
Every time they
forward.
do that, when they got Tsipras in, the Greek Prime Minister, it was like a show trial.
Exactly.
Guy Verhofstadt was nearly, you know, waiting to jump over his table to go and take a swing at him, it looked like. I mean,
it's not the way
you know, they all get on their high horse.
Right. I mean, and does it actually have the desired effect?
No. Well, she's probably a hero.
It has the opposite effect. She left happy. She left happy and she came willingly. And she was, but by the way, she was treated with respect. Timmermans' arguments were powerful. You sign up to these things, and it wasn't a deviation from the law. I mean, I think it was a pretty...
But remember, she
wasn't
obliged. But she wasn't
I was going to say she comes,
She
you see.
volunteered to come.
Yes,
that's the point.
And Cyprus
and now we have Denmark too, with its asylum law.
We're still waiting for Cameron, aren't we?
And the problem with all of this is that you have many laws now which could be breaching treaties. So we have to get a way of the Commission examining this without making this kind of theatre where it completely backfires.
Right. I mean, what happens now?
Well, the Commission investigates, and that'll take them the next 2 or 3 months. Meantime, the Parliament will go scurrying around making all kinds of allegations from certain political groups about Poland.
Right.
It's on their agenda, like Hungary was and like other countries are.
But Poland's unlikely to change anything in the meantime.
Absolutely not.
Oh no, she's probably going home to record approval ratings and will continue doing what she does, and the European Union will complain and moan about it and then find some other bogeyman to go after.
And at that point, we'll probably invite you back on, Claude. Claude Moraes, thank you. Now, it's time for the latest in our series, Meet the Neighbours. Today, we're looking at one of the newer EU member states, Romania, which joined in 2007. Here's Adam again, and he's been sizing up the Romanian Parliament building in Bucharest.
Who would build a palace like this? The Ceausescus, of course, the husband and wife dictator duo who ruled Romania for more than 2 decades. Now it's the country's parliament, the biggest in the world, and apparently the largest civilian administrative building on the planet. Tour guide Irina rolled out the red carpet for me after Romania's MPs gave us permission to film. The first thing you notice is like a museum for chandeliers. 5,000 of them.
It is said that they got this idea of having these beautiful lamps once they were in a state visit in France in the 70s, moment when they have visited Versailles. Elena Ceausescu was impressed seeing those beautiful lamps, and she thought that it would be great to have them here.
And how about his and hers matching staircases? The steps are smaller than usual because the Ceausescus were quite short, but liked a big entrance. Those curtains weigh a ton, you know. In this place, you can walk for miles.
There's a lot of marble here.
All that marble makes this the heaviest building in the world. Parliament's not sitting today, so the corridors are pretty quiet. But Romania went through a political crisis last year. A fire in a Bucharest nightclub, which claimed 60 lives, led to the resignation of the Prime Minister over allegations of epic corruption. Talking of epic, check out the ballroom. It's 5 stories high. There's room for a symphony orchestra, and you can get a sports car through the doors.
As a Romanian person, how do you feel about this building and its vastness?
First thing, we didn't need such a building in those days. It was built with a great effort, so that's what I need to appreciate myself, the effort of the people that have worked for this building, as there were more than 1 million people involved in this grand project.
And I should say that the urban myth is that Ceausescu wanted the skylight to open so that his helicopter could land in here.
If he couldn't escape that way, there's always the spooky basement.
Is it true that down here there's a nuclear bunker?
Yes, it's true. Not only one, but 2 of them.
Sadly, Top Gear beat us to it. They staged a race down here a few years ago.
And here's our final stop, the grand balcony with the specially lowered parapet so that Ceausescu looked nice and tall when he addressed the Romanian people from here. Of course, he never did that because his regime collapsed before this massive building could be finished.
Well, that was Adam. It's enormous, that building. Just seen there. I mean, do we underestimate how bad the histories of some of these newer members of the EU have been, how difficult it is for them to sort of come into a club where there are countries like Britain, France and Germany?
Yes, but I mean, the interesting thing is to see them recreating their history. I've noticed that particularly. People talk about the EU becoming this single bloc, but as long as you've got countries like Romania, Poland and the Czech Republic coming in, throwing off the sort of Russian history, and even in some cases the German history before it, and creating again their own real history of their own, the pride in their country, then I think that's quite a good safeguard for us.
Is it, or is it realistic to have countries that are so wide apart, where the disparity seems to be so huge, not just in economic terms, but in cultural terms too?
Well, you've got these countries that, you know, I was for when the Berlin Wall came down, and I can't imagine the horrors of living under communism, and I think anything that we've got now is better than what they went through. So, you know, if the people want it in these countries to join the EU and so on, that's for them. That's, you know, it's for the people to decide.
Right.
It's a variety, actually, which I think is quite, as I said, a good and positive thing about the EU.
That's all we've got time for. Thanks very much to both of my guests.